everybody, welcome back to Pick Dr. Osborne's Brain. We've got a great show for you tonight. Before we dive in, want to make sure you can hear me, but also want to make sure how far in the world we're reaching. So do me a favor, type in where you're tuning in from tonight so we can have a conversation knowing who we're talking to and where you're from. And if you've got questions, we're going to get those answered kind of close to the end, but I try to do it first come, first serve basis. So type those questions in now. Let's get those kind of pumped in, and we'll do our best to get them answered for you. So the topic of tonight's show is everything you ever wanted to know about calcium. There are several different things that I want to dive in tonight because most people think about calcium as this element or agent that is predominantly necessary to form our bones. So that's kind of where the conversation ends with most doctors. You know, you go in, maybe you're a female, reaching that menopausal age, the doctor says, hey, you need to be on calcium supplementation just because we're worried about the potential for bone loss. And it's very important that you understand that's a myth. Calcium deficiency can cause osteoporosis, but true calcium deficiency is quite rare in humans. And let's talk about why. 99% of the calcium in your body is stored in your bone. That's why. Your bone is this huge storehouse of calcium as a mineral. The other 1% is found in your serum, found in your plasma, found in your extracellular fluids, but the vast majority is in your bone. And so your bone is this huge warehouse of extra calcium, and that's why it's really hard to become calcium deficient. Now, some people would argue, hey, well, isn't osteoporosis kind of like a slow trickling or leaching of calcium from the bone? Isn't that kind of a late stage manifestation of calcium deficiency? It can be if your bone were just made of calcium. But remember, your bone is a matrix of collagen, proteins, and peptides, of amino acids, of minerals like calcium, but also minerals like zinc and selenium and copper and chromium and magnesium and boron and vanadium, etc. So your bone is not just calcium, and that's kind of the simplified version. Again, you go to the doctor's office and you get this whole thing and this whole deal about, hey, we need to put you on calcium as a result of you being at a certain age. So remember, calcium, it's the number one mineral in the body. We have more of it than we have any other mineral. 99% of it's stored in your bone. The rest of it is in the fluid, what's called your extracellular fluid in your serum. Now, one of the reasons why you get testing done and that serum level never really comes back abnormal, not unless you have major problems, is because your body does a really good job of pulling calcium out of the bone into the bloodstream if necessary, or enhancing the absorption of calcium from your diet if it's necessary. The body's really good at that. So again, let's dive into more on what I want you to know tonight about calcium. So aside from bone mineralization, which we kind of just talked about, what other functions does calcium truly have in the body? One is called it's a hormone signaling molecule known as a secondary messenger. So what does this really mean? Let's dive into this function. This is one of the most critical functions of calcium, 2 with a 0 above. That's a secondary. That's what that stands for. So it's a hormone secondary messenger. So let me draw you a picture and kind of explain to you what that means. This is a critical function of calcium. So on the surface of your cells, you have hormone receptors that stick out. Okay, so hormone, let's just say in this case estrogen, right, comes in and it binds onto that hormone receptor. We'll call that an HR, hormone receptor. That's going to trigger a message to come into the cell. And that message, as it's coming through the cell membrane, calcium picks that message up. Calcium, this is where calcium as a secondary messenger comes in. It picks up the message from the hormone and delivers the message to your DNA, and that's what brings about the effect of hormones. So when we talk about calcium as a hormone messenger, your hormones won't work as well. You'll have a dampened hormone response if you truly have a chronically low level of calcium in your diet, chronic calcium deficiency. So secondary messenger hormonal problems are a common manifestation of calcium deficiency. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But this can happen, and this occurs for pretty much most sex steroids, estrogen, progesterone, testosterone. So remember, and if your calcium levels are too low over time, your hormone message is not going to be stopped. It's not all or none. It's going to be a dampened effect. You're not going to have this communication as well. If you ever played that game in grade school where you whispered something into somebody's ear and then they whispered it to the next person and the next person, and then at the end of the line, right, the message was completely skewed. It typically was not the original message. That would be like having no calcium or very little calcium to deliver the proper message, and so then the right message doesn't make it to the DNA, which doesn't lead to the upregulation of what that hormone is trying to upregulate. So that's a major problem with calcium deficiency. So it works as a hormone secondary messenger. One of the other functions of calcium is it's an electrolyte. Now, it's funny, you never see or hear about calcium as an electrolyte, but it plays a role in nerves and muscle function. So if we're talking about nerves, your nerves have to talk to each other, okay? And in a nerve, well, let's use a different color for you. So if we look at just kind of a general nerve ending, it's called a synaptic bouton in biology. You might have, if you took a biology class, you might have heard this term. But this is nerve A. We'll call this nerve A. We'll call this nerve B. And so this gap in between the nerves, this gap here is called the cleft. And so what has to happen is if this nerve A is trying to talk to nerve B, then what happens is you've got to have an electrical charge come through this nerve. And that electrical charge in part is provided as a result of potassium and chloride, so sodium and potassium, but also magnesium, which we talked about before. But calcium, what's at the end of this nerve is something called a calcium channel. So when the electrical impulse travels down the nerve, and I didn't draw the whole nerve, but imagine this long wire, right, coming down, and when that electrical depolarization hits that calcium channel, calcium floods in to the nerve cell. And it does something to these are called vesicles, and inside these little bubbles, if you will, you store your neurochemicals, things like dopamine and serotonin, right? The nerve chemicals that allow our brain cells to communicate. So calcium floods in, and it tells these bubbles of nerve chemical to dump themselves or to release themselves into this gap. And when that happens, you have little receptors on the other side that pick up on these chemicals. And so what that does is it allows this message to pass this gap and to come this way. Now, your body does that on purpose. Your body wants to have an off and an on switch for nerves, and basically that's what calcium is. So think of it as a light switch. We can flip open that gate or we can close that gate very, very quickly, and it allows for that nerve to talk or that message to stop. And sometimes we need a message to continue, and sometimes we need to stop a message from happening. And that's where calcium deficiency can create hyperexcitable nerves, where a message might not be stopping appropriately, or it can create not enough communication, so the nerve isn't communicating as well. It can go either way because it depends on whether your body needs that light switch to be off or on for that nerve communication to occur or to not occur. So nerves, very, very important. But one of the other is in muscle contraction. So contractility of muscles, your muscles have to contract, your muscles have to relax. And depending on what you're trying to get them to do, if you don't have adequate calcium, your muscles can actually spasm instead. So again, the message is not quite clear. So you can develop cramping or spasms or muscle tetany. These are very, very common. So these are some of the major functions of calcium. Most of you have heard of the bone aspect, but very few may have heard of how calcium delivers the message of your hormones and works as kind of a missing electrolyte to help deliver the functionality to your nerves and the functionality to your muscles as well. So very, very important functions. How do we get calcium in the diet? Where does it come from? So we're really talking about sources. There's a big kind of myth about the sources of calcium being that if you don't get dairy in your diet, then you're somehow not going to get adequate calcium. That's a huge myth. You don't need dairy in order to get calcium. Dairy is a rich source of calcium, but so many of you listening tonight are dairy sensitive, dairy intolerant, don't do well with the type of dairy that's being produced on commercial farms in the U.S., where we have massive hormones, massive chemicals, massive stress on the animals, animals being fed tons of grain with genetically modified pesticides all in them, and you're choosing to not use dairy because the quality of the dairy is not good. And then we have the processing of the dairy, things like meat glue found in cheeses and yogurts and other things that can destroy or damage the gut lining. So if you're not choosing dairy as a source for calcium, don't panic. Like, that's probably one of the top questions I get in my clinic is, oh, what am I going to get for my calcium if I don't use dairy? So let's talk about what other food sources are rich in calcium. So number one, bone broth. Very rich. Now, I'm not talking about the stuff you buy at the grocery store that's almost like watered down broth. I'm talking about the thick stuff where you put it in the pressure pot and you're cooking and softening those bones, and all those minerals are leaching out of the bone into the broth itself. It's a great source of calcium if you do it right, if you have a nice, dense, rich version of bone broth. Number two, another great place, sardines. Generally sardines and really salmon, especially if you're buying them in the can or in the packets where they've been pressure cooked, because the bone's in them. And you get lots of that fish bone that you won't choke on, right? Because it's been pressure cooked, so it's very soft, it's very mealy, and it can be consumed very easy. But it's a great, great source of calcium in the diet. Now, some of you may be vegan or vegetarian and you're saying, hey, I can't really do either one of those or don't want to do any one of those. Well, understand there are lots of vegan sources of calcium as well, and one of the greatest are your cruciferous vegetables. And so what do I mean by cruciferous? Your broccoli, your cauliflower, your cabbage, your bok choy. Like, these are really great sources of calcium, and these sources, particularly the cruciferous, don't come with the oxalates. So, for example, if you're getting, because there are a couple of other sources, vegetarian-based sources of calcium, and almonds, and then other greens, dark green leafies, particularly, spinach, mustard green, beet green. Those are great sources, but the green leafies have a lot of oxalate in them, and oxalate can serve as a binding agent and reduces the absorption of calcium. So foods that are high in oxalate generally are not necessarily the absolute best choice for calcium in your diet, and some of you may be oxalate sensitive too, right? So green leafy, but the cruciferous don't have the oxalates, so these are the ones that you can consume. You don't have to worry so much about the oxalate quantity reducing calcium absorption, but a great source of calcium. Almonds, a great source of calcium. Another really good one, if you haven't added this to your diet, is figs. Figs are another great plant-based source of calcium that can be very, very effective at adding to your diet. So again, those food sources, really solid. None of them are dairy. You could put dairy on the list if you were, using dairy that was non-processed, that was raw from animals that were grass pasture raised and weren't being fed the hormones or the chemically loaded food, or being locked up in small bins and being forced to produce milk, many, many hours of their day, where they run the risk of infection and other problems in that dairy. So these are great sources of calcium. You can put those into your diet. You shouldn't have any trouble at all with maintaining solid, adequate levels of calcium. Let's talk next about what actually causes calcium deficiency. Let me make some room. Okay. So causes of calcium deficiency, there are several. We've talked about this with other minerals in the past, magnesium, etc. But one of the biggest causes of deficiency, and this can go, you could put in, fill in the blank. It doesn't just have to be calcium, but it's high sugar diet. High sugar is no good for calcium, but in particular too, it's high sodium diet. Excessive sodium causes calcium excretion through the kidneys. So, if you're the kind of person that's, fast food, processed box food where they add a lot of the MSGs and other sodium-based items, that's a quick way to become calcium deficient. That's why so many of these different foods in the grocery store, you notice what I didn't put up here under sources of calcium is it didn't put up fortified foods. They're now fortifying orange juice with calcium. They're fortifying a lot of different foods. It's because when you have to fortify a food, it means that food, the quality of that food and the nutrient density of that food, to put it just very bluntly, sucks. And you don't want to consume garbage food that's been fortified artificially so that you can get the adequate nutrition in your diet. You want to eat real food. So remember the 3 rules of nutrition, right? Rule number 1, you can't get healthy eating food that isn't healthy. And so that falls under number 1 as a cause for the deficiency. But what else do we see causing calcium deficiency? There's several other things. Now, one, and this isn't to pick on coffee drinkers or tea drinkers, but excessive coffee and tea consumption leads to calcium excretion through the urine as well, and that has to do with the caffeine. So we could go to, say, under as a subheading under here, energy drinks. So if you like your Red Bull or Monster or whatever it might be, these are things that excessive caffeine is going to cause calcium loss through the urine. So it's a really bad idea to overdo this. Now, does that mean you can't have a cup of coffee in the morning? No, it doesn't mean that. Does that mean you can never have a cup of tea? No. We're talking about the big drinkers, right? The ones that I'll only drink 1 cup a day, and the cup is like a 20-ounce mega cup, right? Like I'm talking about 6 to 8 ounces being the cup is probably okay. It's when you get into the higher, moderate to heavy coffee and tea consumption where you can start to see problems with calcium metabolism and calcium absorption and calcium excretion really start to kick in. Another one on this list is alcohol. Alcohol also works through a diuretic action, but it also through the stomach. Alcohol can basically deacidify the stomach. You need stomach acid to absorb calcium. It's actually one of the other causes. We'll go ahead and put that in there. But antacid medications. What I find very ironic is you'll see sometimes the commercials like for Tums, Rolaids, Tums, where they say, now with calcium, right? Get your calcium. I had a client one time come in to see me, and she was calcium deficient. We knew because we actually properly tested her. And she had a follow-up visit with her OB-GYN like a week later, and she goes in to see the OB-GYN, and the OB-GYN says, oh, you don't need calcium supplements, just take Tums. Buy the Tums with Rolaids. So the OB-GYN, who's supposed to be a doctor, supposed to be educated, right, supposed to have some biochemistry background and knowledge, told my client to use Tums, which is an antacid, Tums because it had calcium in it as a source of dietary calcium. And so, very, very bad advice in that regard. So alcohol, antacids, and this goes with any antacid, by the way, Prevacid, Tagamet, Nexium. So if you're taking something that reduces stomach acid, even antihistamines, many of your antihistamine products for allergies can reduce your stomach acid output, and that can affect your ability to properly break calcium off of the food to make it ready for absorption. So you got to be careful there. Now, other things that can cause calcium deficiency, aside from interventional things, let's just talk about who is possibly at risk. Like, who are the people that might have a calcium problem? Probably the ones that are most at risk are children. And the reason why is their skeletal structures are forming, they're growing, and they're growing very rapidly, and they hit big growth spurts. And so that's where we're going to have times where we might see their diet not suffice, especially in today's modern world where so many kids are eating these highly refined cereals and processed foods that are fortified with calcium, but they're only fortified with it because they have such horrible levels of it, or they have anti-nutritive values to them that they're being fortified as a stopgap instead of eating right, which to me is the wrong message. We don't want stopgaps. We want, we want to be educated and we want to make good decisions. But children are at really great risk, predominantly because of their fast and expedient growth, especially after, again, hitting those growth spurts. Other people at risk here are people that avoid sunshine. Sunshine avoidance can cause a major calcium problem. And again, we go back to kind of some of the myths, of what we've been told. And one of them is that sunshine causes skin cancer, which that's a ludicrous statement. It's kind of like saying water causes drowning. Sure it does, but you need enough water for that to happen. It's the same thing with sunshine. You need enough to burn yourself repetitively over time. But regular daily sunshine that doesn't cause burning is necessary for humans to be healthy. And remember what it helps your skin produce. It helps your skin produce vitamin D. Now, why is that important? Because vitamin D talks to your intestines and it tells your intestinal cells to absorb calcium from the diet. That's actually where calcium is absorbed, is in your small intestine. About 65% of your absorption occurs in your distal small intestine, your ileum, which is the area of the small intestine that occurs right before the large intestine. And that pH in that area needs to be somewhere around 6.5 to 7.5 for ideal calcium absorption. So there's another reason why a lot of that garbage food, because it acidifies the GI tract. It also helps with yeast overgrowth, which also will acidify the GI tract. Once that pH drops below 6, really below 6.5, calcium absorption starts to reduce. So ideally, the pH in the intestine should be around 6.5 to 7, and you should have adequate vitamin D through sunshine exposure that those cells can be told to properly absorb calcium. But that vitamin D is also very important because it helps tell the kidney to retain calcium, to not excrete calcium through the urine. So these this is a critical element in order for you to be able to maintain adequate quantities of your calcium and not lead to a major deficiency. So, okay, and make sure I'm not missing anything here. So let's make some more room in the middle, because next I want to talk to you a little bit about the symptoms to be aware of. So what types of symptoms might somebody experience? Because you don't just wake up one day with osteoporosis. Generally, you have symptoms that precede that by many years, right? And so what are we looking for in terms of symptoms that people might experience acutely? And one of them, with dehydration especially, is acute loss of calcium leads to cramping in the muscles. And where we're going to see this most commonly is in the feet and in the calves. And one of the hallmarks of calcium deficiency is that this happens primarily, it happens at night. So if you're waking up in the middle of the night and your feet are cramping up on you, or if you're trying to go to bed at night and your feet are cramping up on you, your calves are locking up, you find yourself jumping out of bed, trying to stretch that out, you very well might have a calcium deficiency. So that's one of the early symptoms to really look for in terms of whether or not you might have that. Another one is fatigue, particularly muscle fatigue. Your muscles fatigue out too quickly. So like if you're trying to work out and you're wondering, I used to be able to do a lot more, and maybe part of that is because you're deconditioned, but maybe you've developed a calcium deficiency. You're not deconditioned, but your muscles are just getting fatigued much more quickly. Calcium deficiency will lead to that muscular fatigue and that muscular burning pain. So you might start developing that burning sensation in the muscle a lot sooner than what maybe is really typical of your past experience. That muscle fatigue as a result of calcium deficiency is not an uncommon symptom at all. So pay attention to that one. Additionally, we're going to get, remember I said earlier about the nervous system. So irritability is another symptom that we're going to see with calcium deficiency. So agitation, quick to agitation, you just you jump off the gun, maybe your temper's a little bit shorted. That can be a calcium deficiency as well. It can cause brain fog and word recall issues. Remember, we're talking about an electrolyte in the brain, so it's going to create a stopgap between the way brain cells can communicate. So these are all really quite common symptoms of a earlier onset calcium deficit. And oftentimes too, what will happen for people with the muscular fatigue is they'll experience tightness in the muscle. So think of it as poor flexibility, but I'm not talking about the person that's never been flexible their whole life. I'm talking about somebody who's like, I don't know why, but I used to could touch my toes, and that's getting harder and harder and harder to do. The muscles, when they're fatigued and when they're cramping, like these kind of really go somewhat hand in hand. It makes it harder for you to maintain your flexibility. So those are real common symptoms for you to look for with calcium deficiency. Beyond that, if your doctor's checking your calcium levels on, like on an annual physical or when you go in, they're usually measuring what's called serum calcium, which is very, very tightly controlled. If your serum calcium drops below a certain level, it can actually kill you. And so your body's really, really good at maintaining that. Remember I said less than 1% of that calcium is in your serum. The other 99% is in your bones. So your body has this huge buffer where it can push more of that calcium from your bone into your blood if your diet is chronically low over time. And again, this is part of what can contribute to bone loss and osteoporosis, although osteoporosis has many other pathways to creation, not just calcium. So again, look for these things to potentially occur first. And if those things are happening, you might consider calcium deficiency. So, okay, I think we covered everything under deficiency that's common. Let's talk next. Let me get a different color here. Yeah, let's talk next about some of the symptoms or diseases linked or associated with calcium deficiency. So, number one, we've talked about it already, I'm not going to belabor it, is osteoporosis. Number two, very rarely discussed, is colon cancer. There are a number of research studies that show that calcium prevents the cells in the colon from basically growing incorrectly and turning into polyps and then subsequently turning into cancerous polyps. So colon cancer is one of the disease states that we know calcium deficiency chronically can contribute to. Another big one that a lot of people really get confused on, this is another one of those myths, is kidney stones. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, well, wait a second, calcium forms kidney stones. Yeah, it forms kidney stones when your chronic diet is chronically low in calcium and you're chronically pumping calcium from your bone into your bloodstream. Your kidneys have to filter that. And so if you're chronically low in calcium, your bone is chronically dumping extra calcium in, and that's where and how many of these stones can precipitate. Now, most kidney stones are what are called calcium oxalate stones. And calcium oxalate stones require calcium plus oxalate, which, again, oxalate in the green leafies and a number of other vegetables. And some people are sensitive to oxalate. Some people don't have the bacteria to properly break down oxalate in their GI tract lining. And so those are some of the people that we would say will be more susceptible. But one of the treatments for repetitive kidney stones is actually higher dose calcium therapy. So I want you to understand that taking a calcium supplement is not necessarily going to increase your risk for the development of stones. Now, it can in some rare and uncommon situations, but for the vast majority of people with kidney stones, calcium is not the cause or the contributing factor leading to those stones. Other disease states linked to calcium deficiency, one is depression. Neurological depression. So you might feel sad, you might feel depressed in terms of your ability, your motivation, your get up and go. So those things, those types of symptoms, that disease state itself, again, linked to calcium deficiency. Chronically low calcium can create or contribute to seizure disorders as well. So again, if you've been diagnosed with a seizure disorder, you're not quite sure why you have it. You might want to look at the potential for calcium as being a part of that. there's a couple of different diseases I wanted to talk about up here around osteoporosis too. They're not the same disease, but we've talked about this in the past, Rickets and osteomalacia, which are diseases associated directly with calcium deficiency. Rickets predominantly as a disease of vitamin D metabolism more than it is calcium, but the reason the bones start to bow out, if you've ever seen somebody with bow legs, that's rickets. It's because they didn't have adequate sunshine and vitamin D to absorb adequate quantities of calcium, so the two kind of go hand in hand. Even though this disease is linked up to vitamin D deficiency, it also is linked to calcium deficiency because, again, the two are inherent. They interwork with each other. We can't absorb calcium without getting adequate quantities of vitamin D. So if you've had a history of rickets, you know, it's always a good idea to have obviously your vitamin D levels measured, but going back and looking at the potential for calcium as playing a role in that as well. Now, muscle tetany, muscle spasms, heart disease, cardiac arrhythmias, if you've ever been diagnosed with, you know, with cardiac problems, that could potentially be an electrolyte disturbance with calcium as well. So again, if you've had one of those heart monitors put on you, I'm going to draw a 6 up here, you know, where they've told you, you know, loosely you have heart palpitations or you have some type of electrical problem with your heart, that's potential for calcium. It's also potential for magnesium deficiency. It's also potential for potassium deficiency as well. It's not just calcium, but calcium should be being evaluated if that's the case. Now, the last one on the list of really quite common conditions is high blood pressure. And I've talked to you before about something called the DASH studies. DASH stands for Dietary Approaches to Stop Hypertension. And basically what we've confirmed through decades and decades of research is that diets low in calcium, magnesium, and potassium and high in sodium cause elevations in blood pressure. And we know that low calcium levels, because of their role in muscle contractility, remember your blood vessels are muscles. And so imagine your blood vessels are spasming, right? And maybe not spasming back and forth, but just tighter, right? Just like if you have a calcium deficiency, your muscles can get tighter. Well, your blood vessels are muscles. If they get tighter, then the blood pressure is going to go up. The blood pressure goes up, you put more pressure on the heart to deliver blood. The elasticity of the arterial walls is somewhat diminished because those muscles are in chronic state of contraction as opposed to vasodilating with the beating of the heart. So high blood pressure, very, very common. If you've got high blood pressure, you're being treated for high blood pressure, you should also understand that many of the medications for high blood pressure cause calcium deficiency. So it's one of those can kind of really work against you over time. So ask your doc to measure your calcium levels. Now, that's probably another space on the board. We need a little bit more room to talk about how do you properly really assess whether or not somebody has a calcium deficiency. Aside from clinical symptoms and disease state and the history of the individual, which is something your doctor should be considering if they're doctoring you. If they're not considering any of those things, probably because they don't know a whole lot about nutrition, you should probably look for a different doctor. That's, you know, that's just the way it goes sometimes. But what kind of blood tests, what kind of assessments can be done to determine calcium? There's no one great magic bullet like test that is superior. It really has to be looked at overall. So if we want to evaluate calcium status, we look in the serum. You know, the serum being low, so like if your calcium serum is low, it generally doesn't mean you have a calcium problem. It usually means you have a parathyroid problem. But if you have a parathyroid problem, that usually means you have a vitamin D problem. Guess what? If you've got a vitamin D problem, that usually means you have a calcium problem. So it's not a great marker that reflects your intake of calcium per se in your diet, but it can reflect your intake over time because generally low serum calcium levels are a parathyroid problem, which is linked directly. If you don't have a parathyroid tumor, it's typically being caused by chronically low levels of vitamin D, which trigger low calcium over time. So again, there's a connection there. That's why this can be measured. Another test, you know, parathyroid hormone, PTH. So these two kind of are measured in conjunction with one another, and these are pretty common. standard lab tests. Now, we also have what I like to run is lymphocyte levels. So the lymphocyte itself, intracellular, so inside the cell, so that we can look at whether or not the inside of the cell has adequate calcium. Now, why is that important? Remember I was telling you earlier about some of the functions? I think I already erased them. Yeah. But one of those functions was as a secondary messenger. So calcium plays a role inside the cell. That's how your hormone messages get delivered. And so I want to know what's inside the cell, because if a person has a hormone abnormality or hormone problem, why wouldn't we want to know that? Because part of the way the hormone communicates to the cells through calcium. Does that make sense? So we also know that intracellularly speaking, calcium regulates muscle tonicity and muscle tone. So remember, muscle, your heart's a muscle, your blood vessels are muscles, your gut, your GI tract is a muscle. Of course, you have skeletal muscles that move your body around. All that we want to know intracellular, inside the cell, because that's where calcium has its function, is inside the cell. Does calcium have functions outside the cell too? Yes, it does. Does it have functions in the bone? Yes, it does. So again, we're looking at kind of a combination of tests to really kind of get a good feel for where a person is. Another test is 25-OHD. 25-OHD is your vitamin D levels, because remember, if these are low chronically, it's going to feed back and not allow you to absorb the calcium from your diet as effectively. So then you're going to have malabsorption issues associated that are leading to problems that we've talked about over here as a result of not enough vitamin D. So remember that D is super important as it relates to calcium. Now, so these would be some of that kind of standardized tests we would run. We'd also want to look at a lot of these types of things and see what may be going on with an individual as well. And then, of course, we want to know about their gut history. So like if you've got a history of inflammatory bowel disease like celiac disease or Crohn's or ulcerative colitis or any form of colitis for that matter, there's a potential possibility that that inflammation is affecting your ileum, which is reducing your capacity to absorb calcium. It's very, very common to see people, especially like with celiac disease, have issues with calcium deficiency. So again, the evaluation of calcium status is deeper than blood tests, because again, there's not a perfect test, but when we look at symptoms, when we look at a person's history, when we look at certain levels in the blood, and then we look and we match it up to what a person is experiencing, that kind of gives us a better indicator as to when calcium supplementation might be necessary. Now, the likelihood that you're going to hurt yourself with calcium supplementation is very small. It's one of the nutrients we say, look, you can take it, it's probably not going to hurt you, but it also may not be helping you, and in that regard it is hurting you because you're spending money on something that's not necessary per se and isn't going to help you. And some newer research would even argue that taking high doses of calcium without vitamin K and without magnesium could be potentially problematic for a person as well. So my advice to you, if you're going to use a calcium supplement, you always want to take, so let's make some room up here. So if you're going to supplement with calcium, we want a 2-to-1 ratio with magnesium. So in calcium, we want, so let's say, for example, you're taking 600 milligrams of calcium, you want at least 300 milligrams of magnesium, maybe more depending on whether or not you're magnesium deficient. But if you're going to supplement these two, you want to supplement with them together unless there's a contraindication like kidney disease or something like that. So again, if you're supplementing. Now, what kinds of supplements for calcium are good? What kinds are bad? You know, there's a laundry list of different products and supplements out there on the market. So which one of them, is the better form? The best form of calcium, supplementally speaking, depends, because if we're talking about intracellular or extracellular calcium, sometimes there's a difference. But so let's talk a little bit about forms of calcium. You've got carbonate, which is the oyster shell or bone fragment stuff, which is not really any good. Carbonate is really bulky, so it comes in these massive horse pills, but your body doesn't absorb it very well. So this is probably, if we say, okay, which one do I not want to use? Carbonate's not a great form. There's something called hydroxyapatite. So calcium hydroxyapatite is another form, and it's a bone matrix supplement, and it's fair. It's a good form. But then you have citrate, arguably the better of the versions of calcium. I'll put a little star by it. You've got citrate malate, you've got calcium malate, and then you've got calcium orotate. And so if we're talking about just good old-fashioned, tried and true, what the research says as far as absorption rates, this is it right here. This is where your money's at, is calcium citrate. One of the best forms, and generally speaking, the pill size is reduced to a certain extent. Not quite as huge of a pill, although they still are pretty big pills. Now, if you're talking about intracellular calcium, like some research, again, this is not, when I say this is not mega conclusive, meaning this is still, there's still research that should probably be done, but calcium orotate is good at getting inside the cell. So whereas calcium citrate's good at getting absorbed through the GI tract, getting into your bloodstream, orotate is really good at getting inside your cells, so intracellular calcium. So, you know, that is something to be considered if maybe you've been told you had a calcium deficiency by your doc and you were non-responsive to calcium citrate. You might look toward orotate as a potential form to get your calcium in you. So these are your basic forms. Again, carbonate's no good, calcium hydroxyapatite, calcium citrate, calcium malate, calcium orotate. Preferably always taken in a 2-to-1 calcium magnesium ratio, and preferably taken with vitamin K. And when I say taken with vitamin K, it's why I'm a big fan of food. So going back to what we talked about here, vitamin K, lots of vitamin K. Vitamin K here. You get vitamin K when you take it in with your food, because nature knows already that putting the two together, you know, vitamin K is necessary to push calcium into the cell. It's one of the important factors there. So again, if you're going to supplement, consider vitamin K as an important element to be able to drive calcium into the cell. So consider what your diet is, because if your diet's a poor source of vitamin K, then you might really want to consider changing your diet instead of, again, changing your diet first instead of supplementing. If you're doing this all on your own without somebody guiding you, without a doctor, try it with food first. Food is, you're going to have a hard-pressed time hurting yourself with food if the food fits the definition of what real food is, right? I'm not talking about food. I'm not talking about highly processed stuff that we call food. I'm talking about real wholesome foods that are important and necessary for your body to function. Okay, so maybe I didn't answer how much calcium should a person be taking. So, like, depends. If we're talking about a therapeutic dose, you know, 1,000 to 1,200 milligrams of calcium per day. So, you know, don't really recommend anybody look to try to go beyond that. You don't necessarily need to push more than that if your diet is adequate. Now, are there toxic symptoms of calcium? Meaning, can you take too much? Like some cultures, there's some tribal cultures that generally thrive largely on milk, and their dietary intake of calcium is 5,000, plus milligrams a day. And in that culture, we don't really see any signs or symptoms of calcium toxicity. But where I would say you got to be careful and be cautious is, one, if you've got a kidney disorder and your kidney, there could be a problem with your kidney not properly absorbing, reabsorbing, or letting go of calcium appropriately. Additionally to that, pay attention to lethargy. If taking calcium makes you really tired and makes you feel really, really foggy, it's probably not for you. It's probably not a good idea for you to take it. But beyond those things, again, it's really hard to become toxic in calcium. Remember, you have this huge skeletal structure that's predominantly made in large part by calcium. So it's not going to be super easy. It's not one of those nutrients that can cause massive levels of toxicity, especially not at these levels. Again, if you've got a kidney disorder, that's a different matter. You should follow up with your nephrologist or your kidney doc before you are taking heavy levels of electrolyte-based supplements anyway. So I'm going to open the field now for any questions that are coming in. Okay, let's see what we got. So Lisa says, everyone seems to be saying not to have dairy if you have inflammatory issues and fibro. What is the correct dose of calcium to take? We need it, but it will we need it, but will it complicate our inflammatory problems? Generally, no. Calcium supplementation doesn't complicate an inflammatory problem. The proper dose, again, Lisa, I'd go back to test it. I mean, if your intracellular levels are low, 1,000, 1,200 milligrams a day, really, really safe to take, especially as you're avoiding dairy. But throw some of these other foods in your diet and you should be just fine. Let's see here. Linda says, so non-GMO grass-fed dairy is good? No. I know it gets tricky. Like, should we have to have all this conversation about which food is not really food? Like, it's so crazy. We live in like this Alice in Wonderlandian like realm of nutrition and food because set special interests, lobbyists, and politics have gotten involved with the production of our food. The answer to your question is you can buy grass-fed organic dairy if you go to the grocery store. But the problem with that is, one, it's being pasteurized and ultra-pasteurized. So a lot of the enzymes and the other nutritional value of the dairy is completely cooked out. And what you're basically getting is dairy sugar, right? But beyond that, a lot of these dairies are processed with a substance called microbial transglutaminase. It's not on the label. By law, it doesn't have to be on the label. It's not considered a food additive. It's a food processing agent. And what meat glue does, that's its other name, meat glue, microbial transglutaminase, is it actually rips holes in your gastrointestinal lining, creating leaky gut. So if you've got chronic inflammatory autoimmune problems, buying processed dairy of any kind is not recommended, no matter how grass-fed it is, no matter how organic it is, doesn't matter. I would not, and remember, organic dairy doesn't mean those cows were not fed grain. It just means those cows were fed organic grain. And that changes the constituency of the milk. It changes the nutritional value of the milk. It makes it high in omega-6, low in omega-3. It makes it low in conjugated linoleic acid. So not very good as far as my advice to you. I would not go to the processed garbage because it's just that. Let's see here. I like that. Kay says, good phthalates in milking cow equipment. Yeah, that's true too. A lot of that stuff is plastic. Can calcium supplements cause constipation? Yes, they can. And that's another reason you want to take it in that calcium-magnesium ratio of 2 to 1. Calcium, if you get too high, for some people, it can cause constipation. So dosage of calcium supplementation, isn't it dependent upon weight? Yeah, it can be. As far as when we talk about dosing, I'm not telling you based on weight. I'm telling you based on average. This is average 150 pound male, 1,000 to 1,200 milligrams a day. But even in females, sometimes they need more. If you're pregnant, if you're lactating, you're going to need more calcium to grow that baby. So sometimes it depends on weight. Sometimes it depends on other scenarios. So Janet says, did I say that bone broth is a source of calcium? Yes, Janet, I did. So Desiree, I'm taking a calcium channel blocker class of drug for blood pressure issues. Could this cause calcium? It's not so much going to cause a calcium deficiency. So calcium channel blockers inhibit the calcium channel from working, but they don't actually inhibit you from absorbing calcium. They just inhibit your calcium from properly working. So it's going to create calcium-like deficiency symptoms, but not necessarily going to cause directly a calcium deficiency. So Marie wants to know, should children avoid cow dairy products too in order to avoid future allergies and potential damage? Look, I think children should avoid fake food. And, the dairy industry is wrought with fake food. That stuff you buy in the grocery store is not really food. It's coming from sick animals with a lifespan. By the time they're dead, most of these dairy cows are infected with different types of diseases like Johne's and some of the other bovine type diseases. But by the time these diseases show up and really kill the cow has already run its course of life and it's already been ground up in your meat. So they take it, they run it for all the dairy they can get, and they basically chop it up into your meat before the disease actually has an opportunity to take hold. But that's, Johne's is a perfect example of a bovine disease that's taking root in cattle in the United States, and it's quite rampant. And it's quite a problem, but they solved the problem by killing the cows off earlier as food. Ask yourself this: do you want to have dairy products from animals that have known diseases and health issues? And I think that the answer to that is probably common sense, but you probably will say no. Some people ask about goat milk. Humans are the only species beyond the age of 2 years old or so that actually continue to consume the dairy from a different species. It's not a necessity. I'm not saying you can't have it as part of your diet. Look, if you've got, I've got cows, but my cows are the right genetics. They're A2, A2. They're tested for disease on a regular basis. They're only pasture fed. The diets are controlled with what cows would eat, and they have plenty of happiness and sunshine and roaming room and space. Not everybody's got that. And so I don't recommend, unless you've got a local farmer or something like that, I don't recommend it. But if you've got an autoimmune condition, I don't recommend dairy anyway, right now at least, not until you get through the recovery process, because dairy is a very common autoimmune trigger, and it's a very common allergen. Despite how healthy the source might be, it's still a very, very common allergen and trigger for autoimmune problems. Can calcium supplementation cause a heart condition or hardening of the arteries? This is what I was talking about a minute ago with vitamin K, and that, calcium, to get it from the blood into the cell requires vitamin K. The more we study K, the more that's what we're learning. So in that regard, I don't know that there's anybody that's proven that calcium supplementation causes hardening of the arteries. I think preliminary research is now starting to show some of that information. So somebody's asking about hair tissue mineral analysis shows you with excessive calcium. Not sure why. I'm dairy-free. Thoughts. Hair analysis is not a great way to measure. That's why I didn't put it on the list that I had up a minute ago. It's not a great way to assess calcium. Hair is predominantly an excretion material affected by the environment around it as it grows out, and it's just not a great way to evaluate calcium stores. Let's see. So, yeah, I like this question. So, Rick says, dairy-free alternatives with added calcium, are they as good as dairy? If you're talking about like almond milk that's been fortified with calcium, it depends on what else they're putting in it. I don't recommend a lot of those dairy substitutes because they're highly processed foods, and that's what you're getting. Again, we go back to what I wrote on the board over here a minute ago with the highly processed foods creating issues for people. Was told that you shouldn't, Michelle says, I was told that you shouldn't take more than 500 milligrams of calcium at a time because it doesn't absorb. Depends on the form that you're taking and what you're taking it with and the status of your stomach and the status of your GI tract. But yeah, it is best to split your doses up. So if you were taking, for example, 1,000 to 1,200 milligrams a day, split that up over 3 to 4 divided doses over the course of the day, and you'll do better at getting your levels properly absorbed. Sharon wants to know, can osteopenia be reversed? If so, how? Okay, maybe we can put up the link, Sharon, for our show. We did the show on the myth of osteoporosis and bone scans. And I want you to really go back and watch that show, Sharon, because a big part of your answer is going to be in that. What people are being told about osteoporosis, in my opinion, is very false and very misleading. A bone scan does not evaluate the health of your bone. It's it's only a measure of how well your bone absorbs X-ray. That's about it. So, you know, a lot of times doctors will run that, and then they'll want to put you on a bunch of drugs for the rest of your life. And you know, just, you know, watch that video. We don't really have the time tonight to get into the depths, but definitely watch that video. I think it'll be super helpful for you. Okay. So, okay, Cindy says, people with osteoporosis, a doctor told a person with osteoporosis that the only supplement needed to build back bone will be vitamin D. I totally disagree and would like to hear what you know on that subject. Look, osteoporosis is a multifactorial disease. It's not a vitamin deficiency disease, and it's not a mineral deficiency disease. Now, those minerals and vitamins might play a role in how your bone is capable of reproducing itself or mineralizing itself, etc. But osteoporosis now, we actually think now it's an autoimmune disorder, where remember your bone cells, your osteoblasts, your osteoclasts are actually remnants of your immune system. They're immune cells that actually have morphed into bone building and bone breaking down cells. And if you've got an immune system that's gone rogue, in a sense, autoimmune disease, that's one of the connections. There's actually antibodies that we're finding where people are actually attacking their own bone, and that's the reason for the bone loss, not because of a calcium or vitamin D deficiency. Now, we might see somebody who has autoimmune disease who is also vitamin D deficient or also calcium deficient, or fill in the blank with the mineral or the vitamin that you'd like to. But you know, again, it's a multifactorial disease that it's not that simple. It's not that simple as only vitamin D or only one nutrient or another. Looks like our Facebook feed has no sound. So, yeah, sorry guys. I know Facebook was having some platform problems earlier. I don't know whether they're still having them or not. Okay. What do I think of calcium, magnesium, and zinc combination supplement? Depends. I mean, depends on the form of the supplement, depends on the doses, depends on the ratios. What do I think about the idea of having a supplement that has all three? Depends on the person too. Depends on whether or not you're deficient. I know that's kind of a cop-out answer, but I don't think you can just put it all in one category, because some people don't need all three. I'm a bigger believer, maybe I'll just say it like this instead. I'm a bigger believer that if you get yourself tested for vitamin and mineral deficiency, instead of taking like broad spectrum mass quantities of pills, you take what you need and you apply your diet to what you're low in. And that's really, in my experience, in my opinion, a much better option to take. Can lack of calcium cause premature graying of the hair? Is this true? No, it's not true. Not to my knowledge. Never seen it happen. There's a B vitamin that does that. It's called vitamin B5 or pantothenic acid. Its nickname is the anti-graying factor. Its other nickname is the anti-stress factor. But no, not calcium. Okay, so those of you that are tuning in that can hear me, I sent out an email the other day and I was talking about suppression of information. And it's interesting that our Facebook feed is down and not working, and our sound is being hijacked. So again, my advice to you, if you're on Facebook and you want to make sure you're getting our information, come over to glutenfreesociety.org, sign up for our newsletter, where that way I can dictate whether or not I can communicate with you, because with these social media platforms, we don't know when we're going to be shut down. A number of my friends have been shut down for talking about anti-vaccination, and not even necessarily anti-vaxxing, but just talking about the information, the science behind vaccination. So again, I hope I don't get shut down. I hope nobody wants to shut me down, but the only way I can control the message is if you guys come to me and make sure that you volunteer to receive it. A lot of sea salt, is that something to be wary of, even if you're mineral deficient due to adrenal fatigue? Not so much. It's not so much the sea salt that is the problem. Sea salt is a blend of different minerals. It's not just sodium chloride. Unlike table salt, where you go and buy it in the grocery store, it's just pure sodium chloride that's been bleached, washed. That's not the greatest version. And in that regard, don't recommend that so much. But sea salt is not so much. I mean, you can overdo any salt, but you're a lot less likely with adrenal insufficiency to overdo salt. And if you're having your adrenal function measured, with a solid doctor, and having some of the other blood tests and things measured to assess to make sure that you're not overdoing, that would be probably even more ideal. Okay. Hey, did we ever get that sound back up?
Not on Facebook, no.
Okay, so it's just a...
Yeah, I've tried multiple times.
Okay. Yeah, send them to YouTube. See? Yeah, that way they can kind of come join us. Okay. So Margie says, are you going to do a talk on mineral deficiencies and mineral supplementation? I do those kinds of talks all the time. If you're talking about minerals in general, write us, Margie. Put in an email to us at glutenology@gmail.com with your topic requests. I take those seriously. We want to cover the topics that you guys want to know about, and so I think mineral deficiency and supplementation is too broad of a topic. So we've been spending an hour talking just about one mineral, calcium. So if you've got specificity around that topic, that would be even better for us, so we could get your question answered for you. If you're taking a calcium blocker, you're talking about Deborah asked, if you're taking a calcium blocker, should you supplement? I'm going to assume, Deborah, and I don't like to assume and put words in people's mouth, but I'm going to assume you mean if you're taking a calcium channel blocker. No, you should not necessarily supplement with calcium if you're taking a calcium channel blocker. You should work with a functional medicine doctor to get off the calcium channel blocker and to make sure your nutrition's dialed in so that you don't need it to manage your blood pressure. Thanks, Linda. I appreciate your compliment. I really do. You wants to know, is Celtic sea salt good in minerals and calcium specific? You're not going to use Celtic sea salt as like a massive source of minerals in your diet. The biggest bulk of minerals that are going to come from your diet are going to come from food-based sources. Of course, a sea salt or a Himalayan salt could be part of those sources, but not necessarily is it going to provide you with the doses of what you need to kind of maintain what you need on a regular daily basis. Let's see, Marie wants to know an advisable calcium range level. Usually it's between about 8 and 10, depending on the lab. 8.5 to 10.5, somewhere in that neighborhood. Yeah, so Colin wants to know what kind of specific test. I think I wrote it on the board a minute ago. Intracellular analysis. You want him to look, if he's going to measure your levels, one of the best ways to measure long-term nutritional status in someone is intracellular, looking inside the cell where most nutrients do their job, do their work. So Cindy says a hair tissue showed high calcium, yet a lot of these symptoms still relate. I'll repeat what I said a minute ago, which is hair analysis to identify for mineral deficiencies. It's a tool, but it isn't the greatest tool, and you shouldn't rely solely on that analysis to make a decision about whether or not you're truly deficient. Can pain in the feet and calves also be Bartonella? It depends on the kind of pain. Yeah, I mean, Bartonella and Lyme can create, but typically, again, it's joint pain and neurological pain, so like neuropathic pain, so like a burning neuropathy type of pain. So it just depends on the kind of pain that you're experiencing. Yeah, so lots of you talking about kind of nutrient-nutrient interactions, which we really didn't talk about. Well, let's talk a little bit about a couple of those things before we sign out tonight. I mentioned vitamin K earlier as being important to take with calcium if you're going to take it. I mentioned magnesium as being important. I did not mention vitamin C, and it is important to get vitamin C in as well. I'd say of all the nutrients that, in my opinion, that are deficit, underrated, that people really truly need, vitamin C is at the top of the list. As a matter of fact, it's one of the few supplements that I take on a daily basis just because of the functions of vitamin C. It functions as a detox agent. It functions to help as an antioxidant. It functions in bone. It functions in collagen formation. It's just a very, very critical nutrient. I often hear of people with vitamin C supplementation feeling so much better than without vitamin C supplementation. And think of vitamin C a lot like duct tape. Duct tape meaning that duct tape fixes everything, right? And so vitamin C, not to say that vitamin C fixes everything. It doesn't fix anything. It helps your body heal itself. But so many people are low in it because of their poor diets. All right, we got that link up on osteoporosis. So, would splitting soft nails be a calcium deficiency? It can be. It's usually when I see soft nails, splitting nails, I'm thinking about zinc. I'm thinking about selenium as being more causative in those arenas, in those scenarios, at least clinically speaking. That's what I see correlate more frequently with the symptoms outside of the lab, and then we get the lab test back and we corroborate in the middle. So selenium and zinc deficiency, more soft nails, and as opposed to calcium deficiency. So, okay, we got to wrap it up. We're running late tonight. So those of you who don't know, go over to glutenfreesociety.org. That's my hub. That's my foundation. And I want you to sign up if you're not already. Sign up for our free gluten-free survival guide. Even if you don't plan on going gluten-free, the site is so much more than just about gluten. It's about health. It's about the right food. It's about the right exercise, the right amount of sunshine, the right amount of stress relief and sleep, etc. It's about health. It's about restoring health. But come visit me over there. Make sure you sign up for my newsletter there so that I can ensure my future ability to communicate with you. I'd hate to see any of our platforms and social media get shut down, but again, we're not in full control of that, so I want to make sure that I can constantly stay in touch with you, so just head on over and sign up. We'll see you next Monday night again for an episode of Pick Dr. Osborne's Brain. We're going to continue this course. We're getting through vitamins and minerals over the next few months. If you've got a topic request, please send that over to glutenology@gmail.com. If you've got a question I didn't get answered, email me. We do Q&As as well, and I put up a lot of videos with those direct answers for you and love to help you. That's part of why I'm here. Remember, what is our mission? Our mission is to help save 100 million lives. We've got 100 million chronically sick people in this world, and we want to reach out to them. So if you found the information from tonight's show helpful, useful, and you know somebody else who could also benefit, help me spread the word. I can't reach them all on my own. I need you. And just like you're here every Monday night visiting with me, taking my help, I'd love for you to reciprocate and give me your help back. This is Dr. Osborne wishing you an excellent week, wishing you excellent health. We'll see you next time. And make sure you check out this video here and this one here. You might find some answers for your health in them. And also, hit the subscribe button below if you like what you're watching. We want you to be able to get updates when we post new videos. And come over to Gluten Free Society right here, where you can grab your free gluten-free survival guide, no charge to you. We just want to help you navigate the gluten-free diet.